pleased to present our next speaker, Nimrod Kor, who is going to be talking to us about migrating existing IAM to least privilege IAM as an IaC. So I will leave it to you to take away. Do you have your presentation ready to rock and roll, or are you just speaking today?
I do. I'm ready. Thank you very much, Kathy.
All righty. Yep.
All right. So hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. I hope everybody is staying safe during these crazy Corona times. I'm Nimrod, and I'll be talking about how you can use open source and automations to help you least privilege your current existing AWS IAM, and how you can simplify it using these tools. So a little bit about myself. I'm a solution architect at Bridgecrew. Bridgecrew is a cloud security startup founded about a year ago with a mission to make cloud security simple. I can talk about it a lot, but let's leave it for another talk. Generally, I've been working for a couple of years now on AWS. I love open source. I'm an active contributor for a few libraries, mainly around AWS and Terraform. And I'm also the author of AIRIAM, which is a new open source I hope you will all be a fan of by the end of this talk. But let's take it slowly. Let's start talking about IAM. So IAM, or AWS IAM, is the service AWS gives for you to manage all of the privileges in your account. That includes what all of your users and servers can and cannot do, to put it in simpler terms. But you have the AWS site to ask more questions about it. So I like to view IAM as kind of a road system. It allows, in its essence, access to things, be it servers, APIs, actions, and so forth. Generally, when you start in the cloud, you usually start out small with a simple setup. Maybe you deploy an EC2 instance, you have it with a public IP, and you let it serve some requests from your app. The reason, or the big advantage we all use the cloud, is the fact that the cloud allows us to scale and grow without the overhead of hardware and servers and all of that stuff. So it is very easy to see that when the instance starts getting scaled out, you can simply maybe add a load balancer, put an auto-scaling group, create a more robust infrastructure. But that will require more than just one or two users and an EC2 instance, right? It will require a set of roles, a few users, maybe different privileges for different users. Some will only have access to the code that the instances run. Some will need access to manage the auto-scaling and the load balancer and so forth. If we take it a few months or even years forward, we'll have a lot of extra endpoints and resources. We would have probably grown, so we have a lot of users and roles. We might have a database system. We might want to have more microservices that these instances talk to. And this distributed system requires a lot of roles, a lot of users, all having different access, sometimes to the same resources with different levels, sometimes to different resources. And this creates a network that is very hard to control and see. So since this is a security talk, the main question that arises from IAM is who has access to what, right? If this service allows giving access and revoking access, the only answer I want to get from it is who has access to what. Let's start out with a simple example. The question who has admin access to the account is a question almost everyone who wants to look at the privileges in the account asks. So the natural answer would be to go to the administrator access policy in IAM and see who uses that policy, who has that policy attached. So for this example account that I used a few weeks ago, you can see that the administrator access policy is attached to a group and to two roles. That doesn't completely answer our question, because whichever user is a member of that group will also be an admin. So you have to go into that group and list all the users that are part of that group. Great, so we have 11 users in the group who are admin and two roles. So now I believe I know who all the admin users in the account are, right? Well, almost. See, IAM allows you to write custom policies in JSON syntax, just like this one. This is an example for a policy that I found on a specific role in the environment. And you can see that it allows all actions on all resources. That's what I call admin. This policy will not make this the role or the user that has it be flagged as admin anywhere in AWS. So you have these rogue entities which you will have to find to know who all the admins in the account are. So this example shows us two different recurring issues in IAM. First is that IAM is very easily bypassed. You can have a user have its own policies and it can be limited. But if you just attach another policy or add it to a group or replace a simple condition with a star, you might make that entity at that moment overprivileged without knowing it. The second thing is that IAM supports complex relationships. So let's say you have a user. Of course, the user can have the privileges directly attached to him. But as we've just seen, he can also be a member of a group and get the privileges that are assigned to that group relevant for him. But that's not all. A user can also assume a role, which has its own set of policies, and that role can assume a role and have that set of policies and privileges. So it's really complex to understand what are the exact privilege boundaries of each user and role in the account. Another issue that is hard to solve is the enforcement of patterns in IAM. For example, let's say I have 8 employees who are working on my AWS account. And I made sure one day that all of them have MFA enabled because they use console for access, using their passwords. And then we brought on 2 new employees. And to enable MFA, you have to do it yourself. So until they set it, they don't have MFA enabled. And I'm not getting notified that they don't have an MFA enabled. I'll have to find out about that by myself. Another problem is that it's hard to trace and verify usage. Just the fact that I gave someone a specific set of privileges doesn't mean he actually needs them today and he actually uses them. Let's see a simple example that hits these two problems on the nail. So we have this list of 11 admins, right? These are the 11 admins from the group we just saw before. And if we'll look at their access key age, we'll notice that 10 out of the 11 users have old access keys. Access keys should be up to 90 days old. That's why the one with 70 days has a green checkbox on it. All the rest are old access keys that should be at least rotated, if not deleted. But that's not everything. We can also note that there are 4 users here, admin users, who have password and do not have MFA enabled. So all 4 of these are prone to brute force attacks that will lead to account takeover. They are admins in the account. And last but not least, we also have 2 admins here who have not used their credentials for over 200 days. Bear in mind that they have static AWS credentials available and active, and they haven't used it for over 200 days. Okay, so we found a bunch of problems. We found a bunch of things that we need to take care of. How can we solve it? So here is a simple manual cleanup process that can help you resolve all these problems. The first phase would be to get all the configurations, get all the usage, and enrich the entities so you know who has access to what, and also who uses what. Then the first question is very easy, whether the entity is in use or not. The next question we want to answer, or the next task we need to accomplish, is to analyze which privileges are both given and used. Let's say a user is being used. Does he need all of the privileges that he has, or can that be scaled down? Next thing we need to do is create a recommendation. That means not just, well, this user doesn't need access to VPC. It means we need to group the users who need the same level of access, maybe modify policies in a fine-grained level and not just remove the entire policy. And then the final thing is also, of course, to get approval from the relevant stakeholders. You don't want to mess other people's stuff just because they aren't using it right now. And finally, implementing the changes. So how long will that manual process take you? Well, these are approximations that from my experience of running this a few times, So collecting all the data and building it in a good Google Sheet or Excel or whichever tool you like will take you about an hour, because you need to make a few API calls, collect the data, organize it, and so forth. You also then need to analyze which privileges are both given and used. You need to go to the console, use the access advisor. You need to go through every policy and statement and see what are the services and the privileges that are being given by every statement in the policy. Then it takes a little while to create the actual recommendation if you built everything up to this point well. The longest part, I'd say, was to get approvals from relevant stakeholders. This means finding holes in the calendar for the relevant people. Usually they're very busy because they are the bottleneck. And finally, after you have their approval, the actual changes will take you, well, that depends on what you use. But if you use the console, it will take you about an hour because, for example, you can't delete multiple roles at once or multiple users at once. If you use the CLI, you can delete multiple roles, but you have to make sure all the policies are detached beforehand. So you'll have to go roll after roll and detach all of the policies so you can delete them at once. So it takes a long time. And after you've done this once or twice or 4 times like me, or even more, you understand that things that are happening again and again, there's no reason to resolve them as if it's the first time we meet them. So today I'm really happy to announce AIRIAM. It's a new open source tool that we launched, we as Bridgecrew. It's completely open source. You can find it in the link over there. Let me hop over to my browser, and you can see it's a Python tool. It's completely open source. Feel free to contribute, to use it, to test it. We'll walk through it and see how it helps us in this workflow to resolve our issues. So let's start with the what we want to achieve using the automated cleanup. So first of all, we want to identify the unused entities. I think that's the easiest and most productive way to start with your cleanup and right sizing. By entities, I don't mean just unused users and roles. I also mean finding policies that are attached to users or roles, but their privileges are not being used. Secondly, we want to detect drifts. That means changes in your environment, policies that were edited, policies that were added, and also enable rollback. So let's say you don't like the change, or you don't like the change that you made afterwards. You want to enable a simple and easy rollback that will make everything work again. You want to be able to handle scales of over 1,000 entities, and I can guarantee you that in most environments, if you include all of the policy attachments and all of the user memberships, all of the roles, you'll reach that threshold very easily. And it's hard to manage that using the console or the API. You want to support stakeholder approval. You want to be able to talk to them not using email or Slack or meetings. You want to be able to do it natively in tools that they use. And finally, we want to reduce the time to right size. The previous manual cleanup timeline that I showed you is way too long. So what does this tool do? What does AIRIAM do? AIRIAM pulls data from AWS IAM APIs and AWS Access Advisor APIs, analyzes them, and produces, in the end, Terraform code that you can use to deploy and remove and edit and update all of your IAM infrastructure. What are the privileges this tool needs? So it needs read access to IAM, and that's it. It does not do any modifications by itself. To run the modifications, you need to apply the Terraform, and that will be used using whichever credentials you choose. But the tool does not do any modification to your account by itself. Great, so let's dive into the tool. The first command is called find unused, and what it does is collects all the entities from IAM, enriches them with usage, and checks whether the entity is in use or not. So it's the first part of our workflow. It's very easy to codify, but it's hard to do it when you do it manually. So let's do a quick demo. What do you think about that? Launch the terminal. We'll hit AIRIAM, find unused. So I already ran it once, so I have the data locally. You can see it says it so here. Hold on. You see it says reusing local data. That's because I ran it locally. Otherwise, we'll have a few minutes of it collecting all the data from all the APIs. And then it starts telling me what it found. So you'll see we have 4 users in this account who are unused. We have, hold on. We have no unused access keys, which is good. We have no unused console login profiles. We also have 3 roles which are unused, 2 groups which are redundant, 1 policy, and even 1 policy attachment which is unused. All of these should be can be deleted without affecting your AWS environment at all. So we found what the unused. Next up is to create the permissions baseline. So the next command I'd want to show you is called recommend groups. What it does is take all of your users, filter out all the unused, of course, and then split the users into groups according to a logic. The current logic today splits it into 3 groups. The admin group, which are the active admin users and roles. The second group is, only users. So the active admin users. The second group is called power users. It's all the users who have any write access to the account. And the third group is read only. So that group will have only read access to any type of service that you use in AWS. So that command will create the permissions based on we need. It will also help us create a recommendation, but it's not there yet. Why not? Because as you'll see in a minute, the recommendation is not something that we can act on. It's all outputted in CLI, or maybe it has playbooks, but it's not something that we can go to the relevant stakeholder and tell him that's the recommendation, that's a plan. So let's jump over to the terminal real quick and see it in action. So command AIRIAM recommend groups. So what it does now, it uses the result of the previous command, the find unused, and outputs. Well, we found 2 active users in the account. One is an active admin, and the other one is called S3 user 1 and requires partial write to the account. So it's in the power users. For this specific account, we did not find any read-only users, so that group was not also recommended, but it would be if there were any users like that. Great. So we're almost there. We already have a recommendation. Now we need to build it into something we can talk about and not just wave with. So the next and last command is called Terraform, and that actually creates a recommendation in Terraform. Let me jump over to the terminal real quick. So it's called AIRIAM Terraform. And when you run it, what will happen is it will take the results of the previous commands. It will create the Terraform code and start importing the entities. If you'll take a look right now, you'll see that I'm getting the exception that the resource is already managed by Terraform. That's because I ran it beforehand to save us waiting for 53 API calls and creations of Terraform state files. So I'll cut this off. But let's try it without the import and see what it says. Great. So now it should just create Terraform files. And as you can see, it says it migrated the current IAM setup to Terraform. It migrated 6 users, 4 groups, 4 roles, and 18 policies to Terraform. I can specify my own custom directory, but for now, the default is called results. So let's open results. And you see that there are actual Terraform files. If we open one, for example, groups, I don't know if you can see that, but this is the Terraform configuration of all the groups in the account, including the unused, including group attachments, and so on. If you're wondering about user memberships, that's part of the users file. But if you go here and search for membership, you'll see all the memberships. For example, my user, Nimrod, is in the admins group, and so forth. Cool. So now we can create a Terraform. How can we talk about it with the relevant stakeholders? How can we take it to the next level and actually get their approval or their change requests and move forward? Since we are moving everything to infrastructure as code, IaC, you can use code now and your VCS of your choice. I like GitHub, but whatever you like, to create a pull request and start working through there, which is a native tool for more DevOps and developers. It's something that everyone can see and completely understand from Vim. So I'll show you an example of what I did. What I did is I created a new repository for my IAM setup in Terraform. I committed the output of the first Terraform command to master. So now I have all the groups here as well. Let's hold on. So let's go to groups.tf. You'll see the code that I just showed you in my local computer. And what I'll do now is I'll run the command again, but this time without unused. So what it does now is filter out the unused and create new Terraform files in place. So you'll see it filtered out 11 entities from Terraform, and it finally created successfully 2 users, 2 groups, 1 roles, and 17 policies. So let's open results again. So you see the same files exist, but they've been edited just now. Let's dive into one of them, and you see that we only have the groups that are still active with their relevant policy attachments. If we'll take a look at the users, we'll see that also the unused users were removed, and only the active users remain here. So I can commit this change to a separate branch, which is what I did. And now when I open a pull request between my branch and master, you can actually see the changes that I would like to incur on the account. I would like to delete the group without members. I would like to delete the group without policies. I would like to detach these policies from this group. And I can actually start talking about the policies directly from here with the relevant stakeholder. So let's say the stakeholder doesn't want me to remove the organizational account access role. You can just type it here. I will copy this code back into this file, roles, commit it, and then when everything is approved, I can merge it to master. So the last part is how do I implement the changes? So there are many, many tools and many ways to apply the Terraform changes, CI/CD pipelines, and so forth. So that's not something that it requires a high level of privileges, and it's something that everyone does already. Everyone deploys changes to their production. So that's not part of the tool. The tool is only for building the recommendations and gathering all the data for that. Great. So let's say I ran AIRIAM once. I got all the changes. I got it approved. I ran it. What now? What do I do next? So my recommendation to you guys is to run it on a regular basis. Why? Well, it'll help you identify drifts in existing configurations, changes in usage status. So let's say a user uses a specific privilege, but he stops because he moved to a different team or they moved to a different architecture. The only way you would know this is to run this again once in a while. It will also help you identify new configurations. Let's say someone modified an existing policy and made a mistake of replacing everything with star. Now everything works for him, but you won't know it until you run this tool again. The second thing I really recommend for you guys is to start using static analysis tools to identify bad practices in your infrastructure as code. So let's dive a bit into that. I'd love to recommend 2 great open source tools for this. One is Chekhov. Chekhov identifies bad practices in Terraform in general and also IAM in Terraform. Chekhov specifically also integrates with your CI/CD to avoid general security issues in Terraform before they are deployed to the real world. So it's recommended regardless. Also, another really cool tool is Salesforce's Policy Sentry. Policy Sentry helps you create new policies from scratch. So let's say you have a service and you feel that it has too much access and its privileges are too wide. You can use Policy Sentry to create using simple CRUD and YAML syntax, the policy that you want, copy it, its output is in the policy JSON, you just paste it in your role, in your set, and you're good to go. Next time you run AIRIAM, that policy will be refactored into Terraform and you can follow the changes from there. I do want to call out a few other great tools for IAM right sizing and identifying problems. These tools are good for your actual AWS environments and not for infrastructure as code. The first set of tools, Cloud Tracker or Aardvark plus RepoKit, they use CloudTrail data to identify specific API calls and specific privileges, much more fine-grained than AWS Access Advisor used by AIRIAM. The problem is that CloudTrail isn't 100%, doesn't have 100% coverage of all the calls and all the APIs in AWS. So you need to take extra care when you take action based on these tools. Another really cool tool is called PMapper, Principal Mapper by NCC Group. It allows to identify all the possible privilege escalations in the account. What does that mean? So I'll give an example. This is a part of a graph that's the output of PMapper. And what you see here is that these three entities, you have 2 roles and 1 user, can assume these, for example, these roles. You can see that through the arrows. So you know that all the privileges that this user has, he can also assume this role and have all the privileges that that role has. So this helps you build a graph of all the privilege escalations in the account and identify which connections you want to cut. That's all for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have any questions?
That was fantastic. Thank you so very much. I am looking right now. Let me see here to see what we have for questions. And right now, I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A. And I am not seeing anything in Slack. Are you going to be sticking around in our Slack for a little bit?
I will, for sure.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you again so much for being with us today, and have a good one. We're going to be moving to a break shortly, and